I heard the sound of my daughter laughing, loud and sharp, as she hung up the phone. It wasn't a sound of joy. It was the sound of someone who thought they had all the control in the world, someone who thought they had broken me. But the truth is, it was the sound that marked the moment I decided to finally take back everything they'd taken from me. They wanted to erase me, to cast me aside like an old dog no longer of any use. They were wrong. I was 50 years old when I first realized how badly I'd been used. That night my daughter, Caitlin, had just called me to check in, at least that's what I thought. But the moment she forgot to hang up the phone, I heard the real conversation. "He's a burden," she said, speaking to her husband, Jeremy. "We need to get him into a nursing home. It's time. And the house, it's worth almost $1 million now. We can sell it. We can get a new one, something with a mountain view in Boulder." It wasn't the words that hit me the hardest. It was the casualness. They had already planned my future, a future where I was nothing more than an inconvenience. I didn't speak a word after hearing that. I didn't even cry. I was too shocked. No, not shocked, disappointed. I'd worked so hard to build everything, every board in that house, every piece of furniture I had made with my own hands. And now they wanted to throw me away like all of that work meant nothing. Caitlin, my only daughter, the one I had sacrificed everything for, was ready to sell me off. The next few hours were a blur. I sat in the dark of my living room, the quiet of my house ringing in my ears, feeling the weight of the years of hard work I had poured into this place. The life Ellen and I had built, the life I thought was meant for Caitlin and her family, was nothing more than a property to them, a dollar amount they could cash in when they felt the time was right. I didn't speak to Caitlin for the rest of the evening. I didn't even call her back when she texted. She wouldn't have known how badly she had hurt me. She probably thought it was all just part of the plan, but it was. Not for me. That night, something inside me snapped. For years, I had been a fool, sacrificing for my family, giving without asking for anything in return. The bank loans I had co-signed, the weddings, the cars, every single penny I had worked for had been handed over. All for what? To make them happy, to ensure Caitlin's perfect life. I had made excuses, told myself I was doing the right thing, but in the end it had all been for nothing. They weren't grateful, they were just using me. I was not going to let them finish this. I was not going to be their cash cow anymore. The next day I called my lawyer and asked him to meet me. I didn't want to wait. There was no time to waste. We met in a small office, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, the kind of place you go when you're ready to end things, to make a final decision. His name was Todd Fisher, a man who had helped me set up a will after Ellen passed. He knew about my daughter and her family and the way they always seemed to expect more from me. But now I had a different plan. I wasn't going to let them take my house. "I want to sell it," I said, looking him in the eye. "I want it gone. I want them to know what it feels like when the rug gets pulled out from under you." Todd leaned back in his chair, his face unreadable. "Are you sure about this? Once it's gone, it's gone. There's no going back." I nodded. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. It was hard to explain to Todd, harder still to explain to myself. I had built this house from the ground up. Every nail, every board, every brick was a symbol of my love for my family. But Caitlin and Jeremy had turned it into a commodity. It had become a thing to them, something they could dispose of when they no longer had a use for it. I signed the papers that afternoon, and just like that, my home, my life's work was in the hands of someone else. I didn't tell Caitlin. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't need to. They would find out soon enough. The days that followed were a haze. Caitlin called, left voicemails, and texted, but I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The call I had overheard was all I needed to know. I had heard enough. And when the time came, they would understand just how wrong they had been. It was 2 weeks before Caitlin and Jeremy returned from their business trip. The moment they stepped inside the house, I knew they wouldn't be able to hide the shock on their faces. I had already taken back what was mine. I had made my move. But what they didn't know, what they wouldn't know for some time, was that this was just the beginning. There was so much more I had planned, and if you want to know what happened next, you should probably subscribe. The day Caitlin and Jeremy returned, I had already made my move. I had the papers signed, the house sold, and the new owners ready to move in. I didn't need to wait for their arrival. In fact, I didn't even want to be there when they walked through the door. I had decided it would be best if I wasn't there when they first realized everything was gone. That's how they would feel it the most, cold, sudden, and real. They arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, their flight delayed by 2 hours. I knew the time, I had planned it all carefully. Caitlin called around 5 that evening, sounding upbeat at first. "Hey, Dad, we just landed. We're on our way home now. Can you get the car ready?" She had no idea that the only car waiting for them was an old, rusted SUV I had left in the driveway, keys dangling from the rearview mirror. I didn't answer. I didn't want to, not yet. I just stood there watching through the blinds as they pulled up, their smiles fading the moment they saw the strange car. Caitlin knocked on the door and I could hear the confusion in her voice. "Dad," she called, her voice high-pitched. "Why aren't you answering? The front door is unlocked. What's going on?" They entered and I waited patiently for them to find it. I knew it would take time for them to piece together what had happened. The house was still there, physically at least, but it wasn't their house anymore. The keys they had, the ones they thought they could use to unlock their lives, no longer worked. Everything had changed. It took them a good 10 minutes before they noticed the first sign, the empty space in the kitchen where the family photo once hung. The framed photo that Caitlin used to say was the centerpiece of her childhood memories. The memories were now gone, and the walls stared back at her empty, like a house without a soul. "Dad," she called again, her voice cracking this time, but I wasn't there. I hadn't been there in days. Then Jeremy called. His voice was tense, angry. "Where the hell are you?" He didn't wait for me to answer. "Your daughter is freaking out and now I can't find the deed. Where is it?" I didn't respond. I just listened to the panic creeping into his words. They still hadn't figured out that I wasn't going to show up. They still thought they could walk in, use their power, and find everything just as they had left it. It made me sick. But I wasn't going to show them mercy, not anymore. I watched them from the window, pacing back and forth in the living room, talking, arguing. Eventually, Jeremy walked outside, probably to check the mailbox. And that's when I saw Caitlin standing there, staring at the space where the family photo used to hang. She hadn't even noticed the missing furniture yet. But when she finally turned to look, when she saw the empty space on the walls, she froze. I could hear her shouting from across the street. "What the hell is going on?" It wasn't just disbelief. It was fear. Fear that maybe, just maybe, they weren't the ones in control anymore. I couldn't help but feel a rush of satisfaction. This wasn't just a house. This wasn't just about furniture or property or money. This was about sending a message. They had crossed a line when they thought they could dismiss me as nothing more than an inconvenience, a wallet to be emptied. I wasn't their servant. I wasn't their fool. As Caitlin stood there, trembling, clutching the phone in her hand, she suddenly dropped it. The screen cracked against the hardwood floor. She didn't care. She was too stunned to pick it back up. She was already going over everything in her mind, the things I had done for them, the things I had provided, all of it, now gone in an instant. I knew what she was thinking. She was calculating how many pieces she needed to put back together to make her life fit again. But nothing would ever be the same. Jeremy came back in at that moment, still frantic. He had been looking for papers, receipts, anything to confirm what had happened. When he found nothing but empty drawers and a cold, unfamiliar kitchen, his anger erupted. He stormed over to Caitlin. "What did he do?" he yelled. "Where did he go? Why didn't he tell us anything?" I don't know," she stammered, her voice breaking. "He's not answering his phone. It's like he's just gone." Gone? The word hit me harder than I expected. It was true. I had left. But I hadn't just left their house. I had left their expectations. I had left the life I thought I owed them. I was done playing the role of the dutiful father, the man who always picked up the pieces for his ungrateful children, and they would learn that the hard way. The truth was, I wasn't the man I used to be. The man who thought family meant sacrificing everything for them. The man who believed his love and his hard work would earn him respect. I had been naive. Now, it was their turn to learn the lesson. They had destroyed their own future the moment they decided I wasn't worth their time, that I wasn't worth the effort. Caitlin had been my world once. She was the little girl who asked me to help her build her first treehouse, the young woman who called me crying when her car broke down in college. I had always been there for her, always done everything to make sure she had what she needed, but somewhere along the way, she had forgotten. She had started seeing me as an old man with nothing left to offer, a burden to be discarded. She had forgotten what it felt like to need someone. And now she would remember. I waited for a few hours, making sure they were both good and lost in their confusion. I had set the trap well. When I finally made my move, they wouldn't be able to deny it. They would know what it felt like to be stripped of everything they thought they had, everything they had taken for granted. But I wasn't done yet. I still had the upper hand. And if you're wondering what happened next, well, you might want to stick around. This story isn't over, not by a long shot. It was past midnight when I finally decided to face them. By then, the house had already been sold. The new owners were waiting for the official transfer, the paperwork had been signed, and the property had officially changed hands. But Caitlin and Jeremy, they were still holding onto the illusion that somehow I would come back, that I would undo what I had done. They had no idea that the truth was right in front of them, just beyond the locked door. I'd given them time to absorb it, time to come to terms with their situation. But now, I needed them to see the full extent of my decision. The phone rang again just as I expected. Caitlin's name flashed on the screen. The calls had been coming all day, each one more desperate than the last. I had ignored every single one. She had left me voicemails, sent texts, and even sent me emails that tried to reason with me, tried to guilt-trip me into coming back. She didn't understand. None of them did. But it wasn't about the house anymore. No, this was something bigger. This was about me finally taking back control. The game had shifted. I wasn't the one running from responsibility anymore. I wasn't the one playing the fool. They were. I picked up the phone. "Hello?" Caitlin's voice came through, shaky and uncertain, like she wasn't sure whether to yell or beg. "Dad, where are you?" she said, her voice cracking. "What happened? Why did you do this? Why didn't you tell us what you were planning? You just left." I let her speak, knowing it would take time for the shock to fully wear off, knowing she would try to justify everything they had done. It was a tactic I'd seen 100 times before, the act of pretending that nothing had really changed, that they were still the ones in control. But she didn't realize that I had already planned this. I had already made sure they would feel the consequences of their actions. "I'm not coming back, Caitlin," I said calmly, my voice steady. "You're going to have to figure this out on your own." There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and for a moment I thought maybe she had finally understood. Maybe she realized the gravity of what I had done. But no, the panic set in quickly, and I could almost hear her heart racing. "No," she whispered, almost pleading now. "No, you can't do this. We need you. The house, everything, it's all gone. You." "Yes, it is gone," I interrupted, my voice hardening. "And you're going to need to deal with that, Caitlin. You've wanted everything so badly, wanted all the benefits without having to put in any real work. Well, now you get to see what happens when you treat your own father like a business transaction." I could hear Jeremy in the background, his voice rising in anger, but Caitlin was too focused on the words I had just spoken. She was reeling now, trying to make sense of everything. "Dad, please," she said, her voice cracking again. "I don't know what you're talking about. We didn't mean to hurt you. It was just, we didn't think. Please, I'm sorry." I could feel the sincerity in her voice, but it wasn't enough. It was too late for apologies. They had crossed a line, and now they had to face the consequences. I stood there for a few moments, my hand gripping the phone tightly, listening to the sounds of their frantic attempts to fix what was already broken. I wasn't moved. I wasn't going to let their pleas change anything. This wasn't about me anymore. This was about them learning that their actions had real consequences. After what felt like an eternity of silence on the other end, I heard Jeremy again, his voice raw and angry. "You think you can just do this and walk away? You think you've won? You haven't. We'll get that house back, one way or another." I smiled bitterly. "Do you really think so? Because the house is sold. The paperwork is done. There's no going back. I've already moved on, but you still think you can control everything, don't you?" There was a heavy silence. "I did everything for you," Jeremy muttered. "I put up with you, Caitlin, and your dad, all for what? To be thrown out like this." My heart sank for a second, but I quickly pushed it aside. I couldn't feel sorry for them anymore. No more. "Let me make it simple for you, Jeremy," I said, my voice growing colder. "You used me. You both did. And now you'll learn how it feels to be on the other side. You'll learn what it's like to have the tables turned." I hung up the phone without waiting for a response. It felt final. It felt right. This was the moment everything shifted. They could no longer play the victim, no longer pretend they hadn't known exactly what they were doing. I had taken their power, and now they were going to have to figure it out on their own. I sat back in my chair, taking a deep breath. The quiet that followed was both unsettling and satisfying. The reality of what I had done was sinking in, and a strange sense of peace washed over me. But I wasn't done. Not yet. Caitlin would be the first to feel the effects. She would have to explain to Jeremy and to herself why her world had been turned upside down. They would have to grapple with the consequences of their choices, and that's when the real lesson would begin. I didn't expect them to learn right away. No, that would take time, but in the end they would understand. They would realize what happens when you push someone too far, when you take them for granted, when you think they'll always be there to fix your problems. The truth always comes out. And if you're wondering what happened next, well, stay tuned. The real story is just beginning. It's funny how quickly a person can go from being at the top of their world to sinking deep into uncertainty. The weeks following that phone call were a blur of strange emotions for Caitlin and Jeremy. They were at war with themselves, their reality spinning out of control. And I watched it all unfold from a distance, taking a strange sense of satisfaction from the chaos I had unleashed. Caitlin tried to call again, but this time I didn't answer. I wanted her to stew in her own panic for a little while longer. I wanted her to feel the weight of the mess she had created, to face the consequences of the years of manipulation and entitlement she had learned from Jeremy's side of the family. This wasn't about me anymore. It was about them, about what they had taken from me, and how they were going to rebuild their lives in the aftermath of their own actions. 3 days after I hung up on Caitlin, I received a letter in the mail. It was an official notice, an eviction notice, no less, addressed to Caitlin and Jeremy at the house that I had just sold. A part of me wanted to laugh at how desperate they had become. They had tried to think they could come to some sort of resolution, some sort of reconciliation, but they were wrong. They still didn't get it. They still thought that everything could be undone, that the world could be made right with one more apology, one more conversation. But there was no going back. The letter wasn't mine to send, but I couldn't help but feel like I had orchestrated it, like it was one last blow in a game they didn't even know they were playing. This wasn't just about the house anymore. It was about their entire world crumbling under the weight of their actions. And now, they had no place to go. It was the kind of perfect irony that only comes with the harshest of lessons. Caitlin and Jeremy knew they were in trouble now. They started calling people, lawyers, real estate agents, anyone who might have some magic solution to the mess they had made. I had already arranged everything. The eviction was real, and it wasn't going to be overturned. I knew that when I signed the papers to sell the house, I had left them with nowhere to turn. Every inch of their comfortable lives was built on borrowed money, on my sacrifice, on the time and effort I had poured into the things they had taken for granted. They had thought that they could just discard me without any consequence. That was their first mistake, and they weren't done making mistakes. I hadn't seen them for weeks after that, and frankly, I didn't want to. I didn't need to. They had made their choice, and now they had to deal with it. But then came the call that I knew was inevitable. It was Caitlin, her voice shakier than I had ever heard it before. "Dad, we need to talk," she said, her words slow, deliberate, as if she were trying to brace herself for whatever came next. "Please, I know what I said and I didn't let her finish. I didn't need to hear it. I knew exactly what was coming. "You think one phone call is going to fix everything, Caitlin?" I asked, my voice cold, cutting through the air. "You think after everything you've done to me, you can just come back and apologize and have it all magically go back to how it was?" I paused for a moment, letting the silence settle between us like a heavy fog. The truth was, I hadn't been waiting for this call. I had already made my peace with what I had done. But there was a part of me, just a small part, that still wanted to hear the desperation in her voice. I wanted to hear her finally realize how badly she had underestimated me, how she had thought she could walk all over me without consequence. But Caitlin didn't seem to understand that she couldn't undo the damage. "Please, Dad," she begged. I don't know how to fix this, but we need help. Jeremy and we can't lose the house like this. Her voice cracked. "We've already lost so much. I'm sorry, I really am." I could feel a rush of emotion stirring inside me, anger, hurt, and something else. Something I hadn't felt in years, the slightest hint of compassion, but I pushed it down. "No, Caitlin, you're not sorry. You're sorry you got caught. You're sorry you didn't have control over this situation. But that's all it is. I'm done playing your game. You're going to have to fix this on your own like you should have done in the first place." I hung up without saying goodbye. Over the next few days, I kept to myself. I focused on the small things I hadn't had time to think about when I was constantly running around trying to keep up with the demands of my so-called family. I had a new routine now, one that didn't involve their drama, their manipulation, their entitled expectations. It was peaceful, even if it felt a little too quiet sometimes. But the silence was a reminder of my freedom. It was a sign that I had finally reclaimed control over my own life. But Caitlin wasn't done yet. The calls kept coming, each one more desperate than the last. And when she showed up at my door, standing there with her hands trembling and her eyes swollen from crying, I knew it was time to finish this. She was no longer the daughter I had once known. She had become a stranger, someone who had crossed a line she couldn't come back from. The once familiar smile was now replaced with a look of desperation, and I saw it for what it was, her realization that she had pushed too far. She was in over her head, and I had no intention of rescuing her. "Dad, please," she said again, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't know how to fix this, but I'll do whatever it takes. Please don't leave us like this." I stood in the doorway, looking at her. And for the first time in a long while, I felt no rush of sympathy, no desire to swoop in and save her from the consequences of her actions. She was getting exactly what she deserved. I looked at her one last time before I spoke. "The only thing left for you to do is learn, Caitlin. Learn that no one gets to treat me like a fool again." I closed the door behind me, the weight of my decision settling in. This was it. This was the moment where I finally stood up for myself, where I finally took back what was mine. I wasn't going to be their punching bag anymore. And as the sound of Caitlin's quiet sobs faded behind me, I knew that this was only the beginning of the end. But what they didn't know, what they couldn't possibly understand, was that the real game had only just started. The days after I shut the door on Caitlin were some of the most liberating I'd experienced in years. I hadn't realized how much their constant presence had drained me, how much their expectations had worn me down. Without them, my house was quieter, but in the stillness, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: peace. It wasn't just the peace that comes from solitude. No, this was something different. This was a peace that came from knowing that I had finally done what needed to be done. Caitlin and Jeremy, however, weren't quite done yet. They didn't know how to fix this. They didn't know how to get back to the life they had come to take for granted. I hadn't expected them to understand right away. It took me years to realize how badly they had been using me. So it would take them time, too, to really understand the magnitude of their mistakes. But understanding wouldn't make it better. No, they were in too deep now, and they had no way out. I kept my distance. I watched the slow disintegration of their life from afar. They fought. A lot. Jeremy, once so confident, had started showing signs of cracks in his facade. He had no control over the situation anymore. He had no idea how to fix it. And Caitlin, she was angry, lost, and confused. I could hear it in her voice every time she called, and I refused to answer. They had pushed their luck too far, and now it was time for the final strike. It wasn't just about the house anymore. No, this was about exposing them for what they were, for what they had tried to do to me. I had to make sure they learned their lesson, not just Caitlin and Jeremy, but everyone who had ever doubted me. People who thought I was weak. People who thought they could use me and discard me like I was nothing. I wasn't their fool anymore. I had been meticulous in my planning. It wasn't enough just to leave them with nothing. No, I had to expose them. I had to show them that they couldn't get away with their lies, their manipulation, their greed. And that's when I decided to make my next move. I began gathering everything I needed. I went back to the bank where I had made the original loans for Caitlin and Jeremy, the ones I had co-signed to help them buy their house, the ones I had covered when they couldn't make the payments, the ones they had conveniently forgotten about once their lives became comfortable. I knew that if I could pull the right strings, I could cause the exact kind of damage they deserved. I met with my lawyer, Todd Fisher. He was the one I had trusted with everything after Ellen passed, the one who had helped me make the decision to sell the house. I need to put the final nail in the coffin, I told him, my voice low and determined. Todd nodded, his face unreadable. What are you thinking? I laid out my plan in detail. I had access to all of their financial records, everything I needed to expose their lies. They had been taking money from me for years, and now it was time for them to pay. I would report every loan, every missed payment, and every bit of financial aid I had provided over the years. I would make sure that they could never escape the truth. Todd listened carefully. You're sure about this? Once you go down this road, there's no turning back. This could destroy their future. I looked him in the eye. Good. It should. They need to understand the consequences of their actions. Maybe this will finally teach them what it means to take responsibility for their own life. I could tell Todd wasn't entirely comfortable with the idea, but he knew I had already made up my mind. And I wasn't asking for his approval. I wasn't asking for anyone's approval. This wasn't about revenge for revenge's sake. No, this was about justice. It was about making sure they would never forget what they had done. I spent the next few days gathering evidence, more documents, more receipts, more proof of everything I had done for them. I went through years of paperwork, sifting through the hours I had spent working to make sure they had what they needed. I added up the numbers, the mortgage payments I had covered, the utilities I had paid when they couldn't afford them, the repairs I had paid for to keep their house standing. I made a detailed list of every single dollar I had spent on them. It came to more than $250,000. More than $250,000 I would never see again. More than $250,000 that had been taken from me while they sat in their beautiful home, enjoying the luxuries they had convinced themselves were their due. I had everything in place, and once I filed the paperwork, once I sent everything to the authorities, it would be too late for them to fix it. They would be exposed for what they were. I didn't just want to ruin their reputation. I wanted to destroy their ability to ever rely on me again. I wanted them to know that their actions had consequences, that they couldn't just walk all over me without eventually paying the price. The day I sent the paperwork off, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I had done it. The final strike was in motion. Now I just had to wait. I knew Caitlin and Jeremy would panic. I knew they would try to call, try to smooth things over, try to explain themselves. But it was too late for explanations. This wasn't about reconciliation. This was about them learning that the price of their greed was too high to ever pay back. I waited for the phone to ring. I knew it would, but when it did, I wasn't going to answer. Not anymore. They had made their bed. Now they would have to lie in it. The final strike had been made, and there was no going back. The first sign that things were going wrong for Caitlin and Jeremy came 3 days after I sent the paperwork. A letter from the bank arrived in my mailbox, not for me, but for them. It was the final notice, the one that confirmed their mortgage was in default. I could hardly contain my satisfaction as I read through it, knowing that it was my actions, everything I had done, that had pushed them to this point. This wasn't just about the house. This was about their complete and utter collapse. But the real fun began the day they finally came to my door. Caitlin stood there, her face pale, her eyes red from sleepless nights and endless worry. I could see the fear in her eyes even before she spoke. She hadn't expected this. None of them had. They thought I would cave, that I would give in to their pleas, that I would be the same father they had manipulated for years. But they had forgotten something. They had forgotten what I was capable of when pushed too far. "Dad, please," Caitlin started, her voice breaking before she even finished the sentence. "We didn't mean for this to happen. You have to understand. We never thought it would come to this." Her words were hollow, but they hit me nonetheless. I could see the desperation in her face, the realization that everything she had counted on was slipping away. But it was too late for apologies. She had already made her choice. She had already taken everything I had given her for granted. I didn't invite her in. I simply stood there in the doorway, the cool air from the evening breeze pushing past us as if it were indifferent to the drama unfolding in front of me. "Do you have any idea what you've done to us?" she asked, her voice rising now, frustration and panic bleeding through. "We're losing everything. We're going to lose the house, and I can't lose everything. I can't. Please just talk to us. We can fix this." I looked at her, and for the first time I truly saw her. I saw the daughter who had been so eager to take, so eager to exploit the love I had poured into our family. And I felt nothing. No pity. No desire to rescue her from the consequences of her choices. "You really think you can fix this, Caitlin?" I asked quietly, my voice steady but sharp. "You think a few words, a few apologies are going to make everything better? This isn't something that can be fixed with empty promises. You wanted everything, and now you're going to deal with the consequences. You're going to learn what happens when you betray the people who loved you." She swallowed hard, her breath shallow. I could see her trying to find the right words, trying to make it all make sense in her mind. But there were no words left. The foundation of their entire life, the house, the car, the lifestyle they'd built, had crumbled under the weight of their own greed, and they hadn't even realized it until it was too late. Jeremy appeared behind her, his face twisted in frustration. He had that look, the look of a man who knew he was losing but couldn't bring himself to admit it. His eyes darted between Caitlin and me, looking for some way to salvage what little dignity he had left. But there was no dignity to salvage. They had already sold their souls. "Look, Dennis, we didn't think it would go this far," Jeremy said, his tone more defensive now. "We just wanted to get ahead, to live a better life. We didn't mean for you to lose everything." I let his words wash over me, knowing they meant nothing. The excuses were as hollow as their intentions. "You didn't mean for me to lose everything. What about me, Jeremy? Did you think about what it would do to me, the years I spent making sure you had everything you wanted? Did you think about how much I sacrificed, and all you did was take?" He shifted uncomfortably, his face reddening. "We didn't take anything. We were just trying to live, trying to be successful." "Success," I repeated, my voice darkening. "That's what you call this, taking everything from me and then hiding behind your excuses. No, Jeremy, this is your downfall, and Caitlin, and it's going to be a long time before you two dig yourselves out of this hole." The silence between us stretched longer than it should have. Caitlin's hands were trembling now, clutching the edges of her jacket as if she could hold onto some semblance of control. But she couldn't. Neither of them could. "Please," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Please, Dad, we're sorry, just help us. Help us fix this and we'll make it right. I promise we'll do whatever it takes." I looked at her, and for a moment I saw the little girl she used to be, the one who used to look at me for comfort, for protection. But that girl was long gone. The woman standing in front of me now was someone I didn't recognize, someone I had no intention of helping anymore. "Help you?" I asked, shaking my head slowly. "You had your chance, Caitlin. You had your chance when you decided to take everything I gave you without any gratitude. You had your chance when you thought you could push me aside like I didn't matter. Now, it's your turn to deal with the mess you've made." She opened her mouth to speak again, but I raised my hand to stop her. "I'm done. This conversation is over." With that, I turned and closed the door behind me, leaving them standing there on my doorstep, their world falling apart. It wasn't just the house they had lost. It wasn't just the money, the car, the material things. It was everything. It was the family they had destroyed with their greed and selfishness. And now they had to face it. They had to live with the consequences of their actions. I felt no satisfaction in this moment, no joy in watching them suffer. It wasn't about that. It was about them finally learning what it meant to be truly accountable. I had done everything for them, but now it was their turn to face reality. And as I sat down in my quiet house, I knew that this was only the beginning. They hadn't even begun to understand the full extent of their failure. The real consequences were still to come. The following weeks were a blur of phone calls and constant knocking on my door. Caitlin and Jeremy were frantic, trying to find someone, anyone, who could help them fix the mess they had found themselves in. They turned to lawyers, real estate agents, friends, even distant relatives, but nothing worked. The truth was, their world had shattered in ways they never anticipated. The safety net they had assumed would always be there, the one I had always been, was no longer available to them. I stayed resolute, watching from a distance as they scrambled, each attempt to undo the damage only digging them deeper into the hole they had created. And then came the real kicker, the day they received the foreclosure notice. I remember it vividly. I had been in my workshop, restoring an old rocking chair that had belonged to Ellen, when I heard the familiar sound of a car pulling up in my driveway. I didn't even need to look out the window to know who it was. I could hear their footsteps on the gravel, heavy, hesitant. It was them again. I let them stand there for a while before opening the door. Caitlin's face was pale, her hair frazzled, and Jeremy looked like he had aged 10 years in a matter of weeks. They were both on edge, clearly defeated but still holding onto the last shreds of hope they had left. "We need to talk," Caitlin said, her voice shaking. "Please just hear us out, you have to help us." I crossed my arms, standing in the doorway. "Help you?" I asked, my voice flat. "What makes you think I owe you anything anymore? You've had all the help you needed. You've had years of my time, my money, my effort, and this is how you repay me." Jeremy stepped forward, his voice desperate. "We didn't know it would turn out like this. We were just trying to get ahead, to build something better for ourselves. You have to understand, we never meant for it to go this far. We just wanted more. We didn't know how to stop." "And now it's too late to stop," I said calmly, my tone cutting through the air. "You've already crossed a line, and there's no going back. You can't just keep taking from people and then act like nothing has consequences. You wanted a better life, but you've lost more than you could ever imagine." I could see their frustration, their helplessness. Caitlin looked like she was about to break. Her hands were trembling as she wiped away a tear, trying to regain some sense of composure. "Please, Dad, just help us. We're losing everything. The house, the money. If you can't help us, we don't know what we're going to do." I watched her, feeling a strange mix of emotions, but none of them were sympathy. This wasn't my problem anymore. I had given them everything, and it wasn't enough. "You think I should help you after everything?" I asked quietly, letting the silence hang in the air for a moment before I continued. "I helped you when you lost your job, when you couldn't pay your bills, when you needed a place to stay. And now you come here, asking for my help like nothing ever happened. You used me, Caitlin. Both of you did. You took everything I had to give, and now you're left with nothing." Jeremy's face twisted with anger. "You think this is easy for us? You think we asked for this? We didn't know what to do. Now we have nothing left, and you won't even help us." His words hung in the air, but I didn't flinch. "No," I said, my voice steady. "You have nothing left because you didn't respect what you had. You didn't respect me. You took and expected me to give without ever giving anything in return. Now you're facing the consequences. You'll have to figure this out on your own, like I had to figure things out when I was alone, when I had no one to turn to. You're on your own now." Caitlin collapsed onto the front steps, sobbing uncontrollably. I could hear her muffled cries, but I felt nothing. I had given her everything I had, and now she was finally facing the reality she had been running from. Jeremy, on the other hand, seemed to be holding on by a thread. He stood there for a long time, his fists clenched, his chest heaving with frustration. "This isn't over, Dennis," he spat, his eyes narrowing. "You think you've won? You haven't. You're going to regret this. I promise you." I stood my ground, not moving an inch. "I'm not the one who will regret anything. You'll be the ones regretting this when the truth comes out. You've done this to yourselves." With one last angry look, Jeremy turned and stormed off, Caitlin still sitting on the steps, her sobs echoing in the still night air. I didn't look back as I closed the door behind me. Inside, the silence was almost deafening, but it was also calming. I had done what I needed to do. I had made sure they would never take me for granted again. The final piece of the puzzle had fallen into place. In the days that followed, their situation only worsened. The bank repossessed the house, and within weeks they were forced to move out. The once pristine home, the life they had built off my sacrifices, was now a thing of the past. Caitlin and Jeremy were back to square one, struggling to make ends meet, no longer living in the luxury they had been accustomed to. It wasn't enough to watch them lose their home. I needed them to realize the full weight of their actions. I wasn't done with them yet. It didn't take long for the news to spread. Caitlin and Jeremy's fall from grace was swift and brutal. Within days of losing the house, they had to move into a cramped apartment on the other side of town. The picture-perfect life they had painted for their friends and family, the life they had flaunted for so many years, was now a distant memory. It was a strange feeling, almost like watching a slow-motion car crash, knowing that I was the one who had set this chain of events in motion. But it wasn't just their material losses that fascinated me. It was their pride. The very thing that had made them feel untouchable was now crumbling in front of them. Caitlin, once so confident, so sure of her place in the world, was now a shell of the woman she had been. I had seen it in her eyes the moment she collapsed on my doorstep. There was no pretending anymore. The weight of everything she had done to me, everything I had sacrificed for them, had finally hit her with full force. It wasn't enough to watch them struggle with their finances, though. No, I wanted them to understand the full depth of the betrayal they had orchestrated. I wanted them to feel the sting of their actions every single day, to realize that their mistakes could never be erased. It was during this time that I received an unexpected visitor, Michael, my son. Michael had been quiet throughout this entire ordeal, barely making a sound as Caitlin and Jeremy's lives unraveled. He hadn't called, hadn't come by to check on me, despite all the drama swirling around. But now, after everything had collapsed, he appeared at my door one afternoon. When I opened it, he stood there, looking almost embarrassed, like a man who had just realized the damage he had helped cause but didn't know how to fix it. He was different now. His usual cocky, self-assured demeanor had been replaced with an aura of humility, or perhaps it was guilt. I could see it in the way he shifted uncomfortably, the way his eyes darted around my living room like he couldn't quite focus on anything. "Dad," he began slowly, his voice hesitant as though he wasn't sure if I'd even let him in. "I know I haven't been the best son. I know I've let you down. And well, I wanted to apologize for that." I didn't say anything at first. I just stood there, waiting for him to go on. I wasn't in the mood for empty words, not after everything they had put me through. I should have stuck up for you for Mom, he continued. I should have known what was really going on. I should have listened to you instead of blindly following Caitlin and Jeremy. He paused, running a hand through his hair. I was wrong, and I see that now. I see everything. How much you sacrificed, how much you gave, and I'm sorry. It took all my willpower not to laugh. The sudden shift in Michael's tone, the sudden remorse, it felt so hollow, so forced. He was apologizing, yes, but it wasn't for the right reasons. It wasn't because he truly understood what had happened. It was because he realized he had no choice. His family was falling apart, and the man who had been their safety net, me, wasn't going to bail them out anymore. Michael, I said quietly, finally meeting his eyes, you don't owe me an apology, not after all these years of doing nothing. You've been complicit in this, in everything. You watched as they used me and you said nothing. You didn't lift a finger to stop it. He winced, clearly uncomfortable with the truth, but he didn't argue. He knew I was right. I was trying to keep the peace, he muttered, almost as though he were trying to justify his inaction. I didn't want to cause trouble. I didn't want to get in the middle of everything. Middle, I repeated, incredulity rising in my chest. Michael, you were never in the middle. You were at the center of it. You let them drag you into their mess, and now look at where we are. His head dropped, his shoulders slumping in defeat. I'm sorry, Dad, I don't expect you to forgive me, but I just wanted to say that I see it now. I see everything clearly, and I know I've messed up. I nodded, though it wasn't a nod of forgiveness. It was one of acknowledgement. I had already forgiven him, a long time ago, because forgiveness had never been the issue. It was the realization that I had given him everything I could, and he still couldn't stand up for what was right. He still couldn't choose the right side. You didn't just mess up, Michael, I said, my voice low. You abandoned me. You let them treat me like I was nothing. And now look at you. You're standing here apologizing, but it's too late for apologies. Too late for all of you. He looked up at me, the hurt in his eyes unmistakable, but I didn't feel sorry for him. I wasn't going to pretend anymore. I had already given him more chances than he deserved. I'm not here to fix anything, Michael said, his voice steady now as if he had made peace with something. I know that what I did can't be undone. I just wanted to tell you that I'm done with them. I'm done with Caitlin and Jeremy. I won't be a part of their lives anymore. Good, I replied, my tone hard, because I won't be part of their lives either. They're on their own, Michael. They made their bed and now they'll have to lie in it. But don't think that means you're off the hook. You've got a long road ahead of you, and it's going to take a lot more than an apology to fix things between us. He nodded slowly, acknowledging the weight of my words, but there was something else in his eyes now, something that resembled the slightest glimmer of understanding. Maybe, just maybe, he had learned something from all of this. I get it, Dad, he said quietly. I won't bother you again. I just wanted you to know that I'm done with them. And with that, he turned and walked away. I watched him leave, but there was no feeling of relief, no sense of closure. Michael's journey toward redemption was just beginning, and I couldn't help but wonder if he was truly capable of changing, or if he would continue to follow in the footsteps of the people who had used him all these years. It didn't matter now. What mattered was that I had done what needed to be done. Caitlin and Jeremy were on their own, and whatever happened next was out of my hands. But I knew one thing for sure. Their reckoning had only just begun. The weeks following Michael's visit were strangely quiet. The noise of Caitlin and Jeremy's turmoil had faded, but it was a quiet that carried with it an ominous weight. They were sinking, and they knew it. What they didn't realize yet was how far they had already fallen, and how far I was willing to let them go before they finally understood the full scope of their betrayal. The truth was, I wasn't looking for a clean resolution. There would be no neat closure in this story. I was waiting for them to feel the full force of what they had done to me, to their own lives, to everything they had once believed was invulnerable. The apartment they had moved into was small, the walls thin. I knew because I had driven by a few times, watching from a distance as they came and went, trying to piece together some semblance of a life. They hadn't even been able to afford the deposit for the place without scraping together the last of their savings, and Jeremy had started working 2 jobs just to keep up with the bills. They were struggling. I had made sure of that. I had not given them an inch. Caitlin, to her credit, had started calling, not for help, but for something different, something I hadn't expected. She was desperate, not just for my forgiveness, but for answers. Answers to things she hadn't been willing to listen to before. She wanted to know how I had managed to ruin everything for them. I could hear it in her voice, the trembling hint of disbelief that this was happening, the way she couldn't fathom the idea that they were actually losing everything. I didn't answer her calls. I let them sit there unanswered, each one more frantic than the last. She was beginning to understand that she had crossed a line she couldn't erase, that the bridge between us was burned. What they hadn't realized when they had started down this path was that they weren't just losing a house. They were losing everything they had relied on, every crutch they had taken for granted. They had used me, and now they had to face the consequences of that choice. Jeremy, for all his bluster, was unraveling in a way that Caitlin couldn't seem to understand. She, like everyone else in the family, had always seen him as the rock, the one with the answers, the one who could solve problems. But Jeremy's confidence had always been built on a fragile foundation, one that I had cracked wide open when I severed the ties that held me to them. His bravado was gone, replaced by a desperate, hollow version of the man I had once known. One night I decided to drive by the apartment again. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, but I felt a strange pull toward seeing them for myself, watching them try to scrape together some kind of existence. I parked a few blocks away, observing from the shadows. I saw Jeremy standing outside, his shoulders slumped, his hands stuffed in his pockets as he looked around nervously. Caitlin was inside, I assumed, still trying to hold things together, trying to keep up appearances. But Jeremy, he was broken. I could see it in the way he moved, the way he avoided eye contact with everyone around him. The man who had once been so sure of himself now looked like a ghost, someone who had lost the very thing that had made him feel alive. As I watched him, I realized something. This was what they had become. This was the result of everything they had done. It wasn't just about losing a house or money. It was about losing their dignity, their pride, the very fabric of the life they had believed was theirs by right. And now they had nothing, nothing but the wreckage of their choices. That night Caitlin called again, and this time I answered. I wasn't sure why, but there was something in her voice, something that made me want to hear what she had to say. "Dad," she said, her voice thick with emotion, the kind of emotion that comes when you know you've lost. "Please, I'm begging you. We've lost everything. I don't know how to fix this, but I need to understand. Why did you do this to us? Why did you tear our lives apart like this?" I leaned back in my chair, my fingers gripping the armrest. The question hung in the air, charged with so much guilt and confusion that it almost hurt to hear it. But I didn't feel sorry for her. Not anymore. "Because you needed to learn," I said, my voice quiet but unwavering. "You needed to understand what it feels like to lose everything, to see the people who have given everything for you walk away without a second glance. You never learned that, Caitlin. You never learned the value of sacrifice until you lost what you thought you could just take." She didn't respond immediately, the silence stretching between us as she processed my words. "So, this was all a lesson to you, all of this, everything we've gone through. It was just to teach us something." "Yes," I said firmly. "I needed you to see what you'd done, how you had taken everything I had to offer and used it for your own gain. You treated me like I didn't matter, like I was just a tool to help you get ahead. And now you have nothing. You'll never get it back, not from me and not from anyone else." I could hear her trying to hold back tears. "I never meant for it to go this far," she whispered. "I just wanted to be successful. I wanted a good life. We both did. I didn't think." "Exactly," I interrupted. "You never thought, you never stopped to think about what it would cost. Now you know." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening, filled with the weight of everything that had been said. Finally, she spoke again, her voice small, broken. "I don't know what to do now." I exhaled slowly, my mind racing. "You figure it out. I'm done carrying your weight. You had a chance to be different, Caitlin. You blew it." And with that, I ended the call. I wasn't sure if she would ever understand what I had done, or if she would ever truly grasp the lessons that came with the consequences of her actions. But I knew one thing for sure. I had done what needed to be done. I had taken back my life, my dignity, my peace. And no matter how much they begged, no matter how much they cried or pleaded, it wasn't going to change anything. Caitlin and Jeremy were on their own now, and they would have to live with that. The days that followed Caitlin's call were marked by a strange quietness. For the first time in months, the weight of everything I had done didn't seem to bear down on me as much. It felt like the final chapter had already been written, and I was simply waiting for it to play out. I had watched them stumble and fall, had watched their world crumble under the consequences of their choices. But something lingered in the back of my mind, something that told me I hadn't quite finished my business with them. They had to understand the full extent of what they had lost, and they had to know that this wasn't just about the house or the money. It was about their choices. It was about everything they had done to me. The final confrontation came unexpectedly. It was late one evening when Caitlin showed up at my door again. I wasn't expecting it. I hadn't been thinking about them much, but when I saw her standing there, her face drawn and pale, I knew something had shifted. This time there was no anger in her eyes, just weariness. She looked broken, as if the world had finally caught up with her. And for the first time in a long time, I felt no rush of satisfaction. I didn't need to watch her squirm. I didn't need to see her suffer more. No, now it was about one thing only: understanding. She looked at me for a long time, as though she were measuring whether to speak or just turn around and walk away. But she didn't. "Dad," she said quietly, her voice hoarse from everything she had been holding in, "I've been thinking, and I get it now. I get why you did what you did. It wasn't just about the house. It was about everything. Everything we took from you, everything we never appreciated. And I'm sorry, I'm so sorry." I didn't say anything at first. I just watched her, waiting for the words to sink in. The truth was, I had heard these kinds of apologies before, empty apologies meant to fix the damage, meant to patch things up in a way that felt convenient. But this time it was different. This time I could tell that she finally understood. There was a quiet resignation in her voice, an acceptance of the fact that she had lost her home, lost her comfort, and perhaps lost me as well. "You're right," I finally said, breaking the silence. "It was never just about the house. It was about everything you did, everything you took for granted. And now you understand what it feels like to lose everything. You wanted to live the high life, to be successful without putting in the effort, without seeing the damage you caused along the way. You took, and now you're facing the consequences." She nodded, her eyes downcast. I could see the exhaustion in her posture, the emotional toll everything had taken on her. But there was also something else, something that hadn't been there before. I could see that she had learned something, and that made the difference. "I know you're not going to forgive me," she whispered, her voice barely above a whisper. "And I don't expect you to, but I needed you to know that I understand, and I'm sorry for everything." I watched her for a moment longer, and then, finally, I nodded. It wasn't forgiveness, not really, but it was something. It was an acknowledgement that she had learned, that she had faced her own choices. That, in the end, was all I needed. "I'm not going to pretend everything can be fixed with a few words, Caitlin," I said, my voice soft but firm. "But I appreciate you coming here and saying this. I appreciate you finally seeing what you did. That's the first step." She took a deep breath and stood up a little straighter. There was a flicker of something in her eyes, hope maybe, or perhaps it was just the weight lifting from her shoulders. "I'll try to do better," she said. "I'll work harder to make it right. I won't take things for granted anymore. I promise." "I hope so," I said, my voice a little quieter now. "But that's on you, Caitlin. You'll have to prove it to yourself and to everyone you've hurt along the way." With that, she turned and walked away. I didn't call after her. I didn't need to. The air between us had shifted, but there was still distance between us, and I knew it would take more than one apology for her to fully repair what had been broken. I sat in the quiet for a long time after she left, reflecting on everything that had happened. I thought about Ellen, about the life we had built, and about how far things had fallen. I thought about Caitlin and Jeremy, about the damage they had caused and the lessons they would have to learn the hard way. But in the end, I knew I had done what was necessary. I had made them face the truth. I had shown them what it felt like to take responsibility for their actions, and I had taken my life back. I didn't expect a happily ever after. There wouldn't be one. But I had peace now. Peace that came from knowing I had made the right choices, even when they were the hardest ones to make. In the end, that's what mattered. It wasn't about revenge, not really. It was about regaining my dignity, my sense of self-worth, and my freedom. Caitlin and Jeremy would go on, and they would learn. They would have to rebuild their lives from the ground up, just as I had once done. And maybe, just maybe, they would never forget the price of their actions. And as for me, I had nothing left to prove. I had lived through the worst of it, and I had come out stronger on the other side. The truth had been laid bare. The lessons had been learned. And now I could finally move on.